Okay, I'll admit that the Sonic one was... I'll admit that was a little bit out of nowhere. I don't usually talk about Sonic all that much, so I can understand if that felt like it was a little out of left field. But I'll try to keep the topics a little bit more varied from now on. Right now, I kind of want to talk about 3 shows in particular that I watched last year, although one of them actually came out the year before that. I'm a little late on all of these, if I'm being perfectly honest, but I figure I might as well talk about them now. And the point I want to make is I really liked all 3 of these shows, and I don't see myself really making really long videos dedicated to any of them anytime soon while I'm working on other things, so I'm just going to give my thoughts on these ones for now while I still have the chance before it just becomes too late to talk about them entirely and they're just irrelevant. Again, like last time, this is all unscripted. Some of this isn't going to be... It's not going to be as thought out as like a full-on critique or something like that, so I expect to get some things wrong. Correct me where you think I go wrong in the comments, and let me know, and tell me if you want me to talk about these in greater depth, because I really liked all 3 of these shows, and if you haven't seen any of them, you should definitely go do that. And like I said last time, if there's anything else you guys want me to talk about my thoughts on, just let me know. Alright, let's, I don't have a segue, so, let's start about Arcane. Did I just say start about? Funny story, I originally thought that this show was made by Nerdcore Entertainment. It's fine if you don't know who that is, honestly for the best, but just Google it. I'm sure somebody out there will know what I'm talking about, but I was actually rather relieved to find out within the first 5 minutes of episode 1 that this was not made by the same people who made that really trashy Hot Wheels cartoon. In fact, it's not only insane that this show exists at all, but how it came to be is also really insane. The studio that made this prior to Arcane was known mostly for making animated music videos and other League-related animations. They've not had any experience with making an episodic show beyond just quick, short animations, and they came to Riot Games, asked them for $90 to $100 million to make a 9-episode series, and not only did Riot say yes, but they churned out what is quite possibly the best video game adaptation to date. Between this and Castlevania, I am honestly astounded that we are slowly but surely entering an era where video game adaptations are not only good, but can potentially be great, fantastic even. Arcane by itself is pretty close to a 10 out of 10, which would probably make it the first for any kind of video game adaptation I've seen. There's no way that I can fundamentally describe how great this show is in the format that I want to talk about it right now, and I also don't want to spoil any of it for anyone who hasn't seen it so far, because if you haven't watched it yourself, you'll see what I mean. Please just go watch it if you haven't. But I guess if I was to sum it all up, well, Arcane is a very massive story with a wide array of characters. I mean, it's League of Legends. How could it not? The bulk of its story is primarily focused on Jace, Jinx, and Vi, each who have a bunch of side characters that revolve around their own respective plots, that we also get introduced to and create this just fantastic cascade of a series of stories and characters that all interact with one another in the city of Piltover. But those 3 are the main ones that the story is about, and the main 3 that I'll talk about for now. Jinx is one of the main antagonists, if not the main antagonist, rivaled only by Silco, but I feel like I should save a conversation about him for a much longer video, because he's arguably even better than she is, in terms of character. But it's through Jinx that we get to learn about how great that kind of character is, as well as a lot of the other antagonistic characters that we see, on the bad guy's side, because this isn't just a one-sided story, and I'm glad for that this isn't just a story about a bunch of good guys fighting a bunch of bad guys who are very obviously bad and need to be put away. A lot of Jinx's story revolves around introducing us to her extremely warped psychosis, her severe abandonment issues, We see how fucked up the series of events that slowly turns her into the gung-ho psychopath that she is, and how all of this just meshes really well with this tragedy of this girl who just keeps fucking up and just can't help it. Given how that she's normally displayed in trailers as, well, trailers and animations in general, this quirky lunatic a la Harley Quinn, I'm surprised how well her character is implemented, and how natural her psychopathic behavior is with all the context that we're given, and how reserved the writers must have been not to make her quirkiness her only defining character trait, much like other certain adaptations of Harley Quinn have been. Vi is arguably the main protagonist, and Jinx is the one who she's arguably most invested in. She's characterized as this person who values family first and foremost, and so you can see how a lot of this kind of conflict between someone who wants to hold on to their family and wants to hold on to their sister and protect her as much as possible. Meanwhile, you have Jinx, who is suffering from severe abandonment issues and is just fucked up in the head. You can see how there can be a lot of familial and internal conflict that just very naturally and easily arises from that, and a lot of it is just very engaging. A bit of an oversimplification of her story is that it's a revenge plot, wanting to get back at the people who not only destroyed her family, but also, from her perspective, also turned Jinx into the psychopath that she is now. But there's a lot more that the show also has to say about that kind of topic, regarding the cycle of violence and all that kind of stuff. It's the kind of story that Neil Druckmann wishes he could tell. It's the kind of story that The Last of Us 2 should have been. The kind of story that it should have been if it were good. And it's very good here. Vi also serves as a valuable perspective from the Undercity, basically the downtrodden slums of Piltover that have gone primarily unchecked, and basically the hub of a bunch of people that are treated as subhumans by the upper class of Piltover. Vi's interactions with the Piltians also allows them similar insight in a way that slowly reveals to the Council of Piltover the mistakes that were made by ignoring so much of what's been happening in the Undercity. One of these Piltians that sees just how wrong things have been is an enforcer named Caitlin, who acts as a sort of who acts as a romantic interest to Vi throughout her story, and another one who also ends up seeing a lot of the problems that have been caused in Piltover is Jace. Jace is probably not the best written character in the show, but he's definitely my favorite. He's an engineer that helps design technology capable of harnessing the power of magic that allows Piltover to access new possibilities for trade, expansion, and this only worries the Undercity more and more because Silco slowly realizes more and more how the Upper City is just leaving them behind, like in just all forms, and especially in terms of technology. They are just needed less and less, and they're paid attention to less and less, and their problems just get bigger and bigger, and the resentment between the Undercity and the upper class just grows all the more from there. Jace is someone who wanted to become an engineer so that he could design hex tech in order to better people's lives, not only in Piltover, but also in the Undercity. Throughout his story, many different characters try to influence Jace and try to convince him what he should or shouldn't do with the technology that he's created. There are many good arguments for both sides. The really cool thing about this is that even by the end of the show, there is no specific right answer, and that's also partial. And I feel like they should leave it that way because there isn't really any right answer for this in real life either. It's the question of what exactly we should do with the technology that we create. There's a great quote in this show that's it's like, a weapon cannot be unmade. And that I love that line so much because it's not just true for weapons, it's true for really any kind of technology. Once the possibility of something being created is out there, the possibility that it will be recreated is just now there. There's no unmaking it. We now have the means to make this thing, and it is now out there. Now, in some cases, that can be good, because oftentimes when we make something new, we make it with the intent of using it to better mankind, but like any kind of device, there are people out there who are going to find a way to use what you make to hurt people, to do bad things, for just evil in general, whether they realize it or not. And that's also a big thing about this, is because a huge worry that they eventually have is that the secrets for Hex Tech is eventually stolen, and a big plot point in the story is that Jinx eventually tries and succeeds in finding a way to weaponize it, which is a concern that Jace had because he never intended to make Hex Tech so that it could be used to hurt people. He wanted it to help people. In response to this, Jace decides that he wants to shut down his research in order to limit how much people can get access to these kinds of things, to prevent something like this from happening again, until they can find out who stole the research and get it back and hopefully shut down whatever weapon is being made by it. And like I said, the show doesn't really have a final answer for this. It just has characters that present their views on the topic, because no matter what you make, no matter what kind of invention you make, there's going to be some way that someone out there in the future is going to find a way to use it for bad. That's just the natural course of things. The question is whether the risks outweigh the benefits. Can the risks be mitigated? How should we go about doing that? Whatever inventions we make, there is always going to be a price that comes with it. And a key theme in this is that price shouldn't scare us so much that we decide not to advance technology at all, because we would stagnate so much if we didn't do that. We live lives that are far too short to just not do that. But we should be ever mindful of that kind of price. And it's such an interesting topic to cover. And again, the show does not have an answer for this. Jace is a character who desperately wants to use his talents to benefit the lives of everyone in Piltover, even the Undercity. He also understands many of these questions, and he repeatedly tries to make the best effort that he can to allow Piltover to progress, while slowly realizing and combating the price of that progress. There's a lot that could be said along those lines, and I doubt this is the last that we'll see of this specific thematic narrative brought up. And like I said, I'm not going to spoil anything for anyone out there listening, because this format is far too short to just give it all away or even to talk about it at all. In fact, hopefully later on, I almost feel like a spoiler review would be better suited for a much longer video that's dedicated exclusively to this kind of topic. But for those of you who have seen it, you already know what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't, I'm not giving away enough until you just go see it yourself, because it's one of the most incredible shows I've seen in a very, very long time. So this one kind of caught me by surprise. 86 was originally recommended to me by my brother, and I wasn't expecting a whole lot from it. I was expecting it to mostly be kind of average, and I think it is. I'd say it's maybe a 7 out of 10 tops, but it was still much better than what I was expecting it to be. Again, it still came out pretty average, like I was expecting it to be, but that's mostly just because so much of what was good about it was also there was just a lot of bad that also went along with it. That's not to say that the good wasn't there, it's just that it felt like it could have been better, but there's still a lot that I feel is worth appreciating about it. So the story takes place in a fictional country called San Magnolia, which is home to a white-haired race of people called the Alba, as well as the stand-in for the show's racially oppressed group called the 86, and they're called that because they're designated to the 86th district out of San Magnolia. They're not allowed in any of the other districts because racism. The country is currently at war with an army of killer robots called the Legion that were created by another country called Giad 5 years ago, before the AIs and the robots eventually pulled a Terminator and then basically killed everyone in Giad, then just continued the campaign on its own. By this point in the show, the war has been going on for 9 years, and fighting an army of unmanned, automated, completely autonomous robots isn't exactly easy. So to counter, Sound Magnolia created their own fully autonomous attack system that will fight against the Legion, so that they don't have to put Alba soldiers on the front lines. And this time they won't rebel against their creators and destroy them like the Legion did. Sounds a little bit too good to be true, and that's partly because it is. They're not actually automated. They can't actually, well, I mean, they can, but that's part of one of the... They tell us that they can't make an automated attack force, so instead, they have the 86 pilot mechs for them, and they just say, officially, they aren't manned because the 86 aren't considered human. And, well, this is kind of where the show starts to... This is where I feel like some of the problems pop up, so let's just address those first. So first of all, big problem that I noticed was the idea that the 86 have to be the ones that pilot it, which is kind of... seems a little dumb to me for a number of different reasons. First and most notably is because it implies that they can't build their own autonomous defense force, but we see later that they have robots. Well, not robots, but they have the machines that refill their mechs. What are they called? Juggernauts. There's a machine that refills the Juggernauts' ammunition while they're on the battlefield, and this robot is completely automated, and it's not even, like, it's insane. It's able to completely understand human speech, it's able to emote, it's able to understand human emotion, like the level of programming that goes into this kind of AI, and the fact that it is able to effectively and efficiently refill ammunition for the other combatants while on the battlefield is just nuts. So the complexity of the AI for this machine is already shown to be pretty out there, and it seems very loyal, like they compare it to a dog, of all things. The fact that they imply that Magnolia can't make an actually automated defense force seems a little... very contrived, actually, because they already have robots that work for them. They just don't put guns on them. That's all they would really need to do, was just put guns on these robots and then have them go out and fight, and they wouldn't need to do this. They wouldn't need to send the 86 out there, which the fact that they send out 86 at all also seems... I don't know, it seems a little bit forced for the sake of having this particular kind of... The world building is kind of the main issue that I have with this. The entire premise relies on the idea that it makes perfect sense for, say, Nazi Germany to comprise their entire army of only Jews, and exclusively Jews. Like, can you imagine if during the American Civil War, the South just decided to give all of their weapons, all of their vehicles, all their munitions to slaves, then told them to go to town and gave them absolutely no supervision whatsoever, and just expected everything to work out? And I mean, that's basically what's happening here, is they give the 86 their weapons, they comprise their armies exclusively of 86, and as far as the show, as far as we're shown, the 86 have almost no supervision whatsoever. Even their commanders, the handlers, basically, are shown pretty early on not to really care too much about their soldiers, and the only interactions that they have with one another is via a psychic link, and they just communicate with each other telepathically that way. They almost never see each other ever, and there's almost never another Alba soldier on site when the 86 are standing by. I mean, this just sounds like a recipe for disaster for so many different reasons. You give weapons to the people that hate you, you force them to fight a war, which seems very questionable for a number of different reasons, because first of all, the country fundamentally believes that the 86 are not only subhuman, but they are inferior to them in every possible way, and yet they comprise their attack force exclusively of these people. They, like, They make their armies exclusively the people who they think are inferior to them. Why would they do that? One of the things that we learn early on in the show is that within the first couple weeks of fighting the Legion, not even the first year, but the first weeks of combat, the Legion completely wiped the floor with these guys, with San Magnolia, and they were unable to combat them, and so they created the Juggernaut program in response. So in response to losing the war, they put people who were inferior, or they put people, well, they put people who they thought were inferior to them onto the battlefield in place of the soldiers who they thought were superior. Why? This is also just ignoring the bigger elephant in the room, is the fact that you are giving weapons to the people who hate you. You are giving them the means. You are putting the fate of your entire country in the hands of people who hate you, and who, for any reason, could decide to just not fight for you and allow the Legion to just stomp all over your country, or even worse, decide to form a coup during the midst of a war, which you do not have the time and resources to devote to try to combat, while also trying to fight the Legion. Like I said, there's nothing that we're given to indicate that 86 couldn't just abandon their posts. There are many times when we're shown that Spearhead Squadron is able to just leave the barracks before they even get their missions from their handler. So they could just straight up leave if they wanted to. And the fact that most handlers don't even give two shits about providing tactical support in any way, let alone ensuring that their squadrons are falling in line at all, just, yeah, recipe for disaster. But I'll try to give the show some credit. The story takes place pretty late in the war's campaign, so for all we know, things might have been much stricter 4 years ago. And there's an ongoing theme that much of San Magnolia has become complacent since the war is supposedly reaching its conclusion. The lack of supervision could just be evidence of that, but honestly, in the face of a threat that's capable of wiping out an entire country, and one that they couldn't even stand up against for more than 3 weeks, like, what leader in their right mind thinks that it's a good idea to put the people who they classify as inferior in charge of a defense force against such a threat? It's certainly not me. There's a bit more stuff to talk about in regards to world building, but honestly, it'd be better to save a lot of it for a full video if I ever decide to make one. 86's strong suit is its thematic storytelling. There are a lot of motifs, both narrative and visual, that indicate a level of apathy from the country of San Magnolia. Their understanding and research of the Legion leads them to believe that without a country to run and maintain the Legion, the longest any AI will last on its own is 6 years. And since Giad fell 4 years ago, the country is expecting the army to simply drop dead in another 2. And so because they are just expecting the war to eventually end soon, defenses are lax. There are a lot higher ranking officials that are becoming less and less concerned about not only the war, but even prejudice directed towards the 86 and their inhuman treatment. That is except for our main character, Vladilena Milize, which the story follows and centers around as she commands a group of elite 86 who she sympathizes with and tries to help, basically, while also simultaneously having to face her own internalized prejudice and apathy that she's also had towards the 86, realizing that she has also gained a level of complacency because of the environment that she's grown up around. Besides also confronting her own apathy, she also confronts the apathy of many of her commanders, most notably being her uncle, who is one of the bigger moral opponents that she faces, and one who repeatedly discourages her from getting attached to the 86 in her unit. But later in a flashback, we learn that he had relations to the family of the leader of Spearhead Squadron, which that's kind of what comes off as most interesting to me, is the fact that most of the quote-unquote villains in this story aren't really bad necessarily. They just display the natural apathy of a citizen subservient to a tyrannical government, basically null to the horrors that they've since come to accept that they have no power to change, even when they don't realize that they do. As another example, Milize has a friend named Annette, who was all but convinced that there was no point in trying to fight back when it's so much easier to just enjoy the simplicity in life, and that's the apathy that she has. She just doesn't see the point in trying to help when there's really not much that you can do. But then she learns that Spearhead Squadron's leader is a boy who she knew as a child, and that the rest of his squadron would be sent out soon on a suicide mission during the events of one of the final episodes. And initially, she was just content with just kind of letting everything happen and just ignoring everything, being like everyone else and just ignoring a lot of the treatment to the 86, until she came to this realization, and she finally addresses her own apathy and helps Milize access mortar weapons that ends up saving the whole squadron. And it's all very reminiscent. It all makes me think of that one quote. I don't know who said it, but it goes, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And this goes just as much for the 86. They acknowledge that all it would take would be for them to simply lay down their arms, and the nation that's enslaved them for so many years would probably suffer in a matter of days. But if they do nothing, one evil may fall, but another triumphs regardless. And one of the bigger reveals midway through the season also plays into this very same theme. The Legion AI, they aren't actually going to drop dead in 2 years. Their AI is evolving. They are slowly finding ways to become self-sustaining. And they will basically outlast the remaining 2 years. It's estimated that they'll remain active. And since San Magnolia is already growing more and more apathetic about this, they will just be unable to fight against the Legion when this time comes. And it will happen because of the apathy of San Magnolia's leaders. Even near the end of the season, Spearhead Squadron survives the mission that they're supposed to be executed in, but retreat is non-optional. Milize might have saved them, but their mission insists that they continue into enemy territory where they will continue to fight and survive until they die. And this is supposed to be the wake-up call for both Milize and the audience. If no one does anything, evil will continue to triumph. More 86 will be sent to their deaths, and the Legion will eventually win. And the fact that you see the days leading up to Spearhead's slow but inevitable destruction only further compounds this theme all the more. It's certainly not as good as a lot of people are making it out to be, and there's so much more that also gives credence to this that I don't even think that I can recite it all in such a short video like this. There's so many great ways of visually communicating a lot of these very same themes in the world around them. I especially love a lot of the different talks that Milize has with Annette, and how the framing of certain scenes can show as if there is a rift growing between them, symbolizing Milize's slow drift away from the apathetic views of her country. And there are just so many other really neat visuals that, God, I wish I could talk about it in something as short as this one. It's certainly not as good as a lot of people are making it out to be. The world building, like I said, has a lot of problems, but the good still outweighs most of the bad, and I think it's worth watching in spite of what it does wrong, and it really makes me excited to see what else this show has to offer, because at the time of watching this, I haven't seen Season 2, and I'm just, I'm looking forward to just binging the hell out of that. Much like 86, Great Pretender was another anime that I really wasn't expecting to enjoy nearly as much as I did. And I probably wouldn't have even really watched it if it weren't for two things. The first were the visuals. I'm not the kind of guy to value visuals nearly as much as writing, unless it is specifically there to benefit the writing. But I really just fell in love with a lot of the visuals here. Besides the animation, a lot of the backdrops and backgrounds for many of the different scenes look like they're straight out of a painting. The vibrant diversity of colors that are all so varied in a way that perfectly matches a lot of the upbeat tone of the show, while never undermining a lot of the more somber and lower emotional moments. In fact, the color palette is often changed to better communicate a change in tone in the scene, which yeah, like I said, I do like it when visuals better communicate the writing. The second thing was the soundtrack. The anime takes place in a number of different settings around the world, Japan, America, London, and Singapore, among several others. And its soundtrack is just as varied as the locales that are featured in the anime. From blues to rap to some somber piano themes, and there's a lot of heavy emphasis on jazz themes, most notably in the opening. And of course, the ending is none other than Freddie Mercury's cover of The Great Pretender, originally sung by, I think it was the Platters in 1960. If I'm wrong, I'm gonna put something up right here just to, yeah. I would be absolutely astonished if, given how jazzy the rest of the soundtrack is, that they didn't even include the song that their anime is named after. In fact, the fact that they got it at all is probably the reason why they named it in the first place. Although, there are certainly many more reasons that I could go on for in a much longer video. Something else that really stuck out to me was how the soundtrack, bear with me on this, because I'm not sure how to describe it, but it didn't really, very few of the songs really sounded like something that I would expect to come out of an anime or some kind of J-pop kind of song that you hear in most anime. And yeah, that's a very odd thing to focus on, but it's part of a much broader reason that drew me to Great Pretender. I consider myself a fan of anime, but I wouldn't say that there are many that I truly enjoy. In fact, the ones that stick out to me the most are usually the anime that don't feel like they're anime. And this is very much like that, not only in the soundtrack, but just in general. Great Pretender has all the trappings of an anime. It looks like an anime, it sounds like an anime, it moves like an anime, and for all intents and purposes, it is an anime, but it doesn't feel like an anime. And I really like that because it sticks it out from, it helps it stick out from the crowd, and I'm glad that it does, because I don't think I would have checked out this amazing show if it wasn't. And nowhere is that more emphasized than in the writing. Although, to be fair, when was the last time that we heard of a heist anime that wasn't Lupin the Third? Great Pretender focuses around the characters of Laurent and Abby and a few others as they indoctrinate our main character, Makoto Edamura, into basically their band of thieves as they perform heists on extremely wealthy and just really bad people. The show is broken up into a series of arcs, where each arc focuses on one of the main characters, develops their backstory and just who they are a little bit, all while getting involved in a heist meant to steal from someone just generally really bad. Can't really talk about, I really don't have enough time to talk about all the arcs, but I'll talk about the first arc, which focuses primarily on Edamura, who I would describe as a very sympathetic and relatively complex character for someone who makes his living as one of Japan's top scam artists. Their words, not mine. If I can give it some little bit of criticism, if you can say that you are the top scam artist anywhere, you're doing it wrong. But I digress. Finding a way to write a character that is morally dubious while still making him out to be someone with a heart of gold is something that can be challenging, but it can be really engaging when it's done correctly. And they do a pretty good job with Edamura, considering that his first scene on screen is him literally ripping off an old elderly woman, trying to sell her this really expensive water filter, and just tricks her into buying this incredibly expensive filter that ultimately does nothing. But the part that makes him sympathetic is that despite being so good at what Edamura does and priding himself on his work, scam artistry is not something that he actually wants to do. It's just something that happened. It's just something that he happened to get roped into. When he was much younger, he got roped into... He took on a job that he didn't really realize at first was committing fraud. Fraud? Is it fraud? Yeah, they're committing fraud, and because he didn't realize it, he was also arrested for committing fraud and spent 3 years in jail, and that basically, once that was on his record, it became so difficult for him to actually get a job, and it was even worse because he was trying to take care of his mother, and since he couldn't get a job to take care of her, she ended up passing away. And there's also a lot more interesting kind of stuff later on as we find out that he has a bit of resentment against his father, who started off as this lawyer that wanted to that tried to encourage and instill values of justice and morality into his son, and then ultimately was revealed to be a human trafficker, basically. So Edamura, he does not like the idea of being a criminal. He just does this because that's what he has to do to survive. You know, like when life gives you lemons and all that. And there's more or less, that's more or less the thought process when he deals with Laurent and Abby, when the two of them come along to try to scout him into their group, and they trick him into coming to America in order to help them with this massive scam on a mafia boss, to try to get $5 million out of him by selling him candy and tricking him into believing that it's an ingestible narcotic that's worth $5 million. Edamura is only interested in either scamming Laurent back or just proving overall that he's the better scam artist, but it's not as though he has any interest in befriending the guy, nor does he have any real interest in their line of work in general. For as good as he is at being a thief, Edamura desperately wants out. He wants to live a normal life, working a normal job, the same as anyone else, and after forming a level of resentment towards his father after everything that had happened when he was younger, I mean, who could blame him? It would make less sense for him to want to be in this line of work, and I'm glad that they focus on that, because he's so much more than just this caricature whose sole defining characteristic is that he wants to steal things, which I feel like other shows might try to write a character like this. He has aspirations and a personality that go far beyond some two-dimensional persona that never changes. He's dynamic and multifaceted, and as the scam goes on, he becomes less and less appealed by the idea of scamming a mobster, as they're forced to change plans from selling the guy candy to actually producing and distributing methamphetamines. So they go from doing something that is mildly illegal to something that is really illegal. He also befriends a bodyguard of the mobster named Salazar, who has a son that Makoto views in much the way that he does himself in relation to his own father. Both Salazar and his father were in a very sketchy line of work. Salazar arguably much less than his father was, and he wants to try to help Salazar also get out of this line of work because he doesn't want his son to have the same level of resentment for his father that Makoto has for his, after realizing what Salazar actually does for a living and the kinds of things that he does. Which is, that's great. That's exactly what I feel a character like that would do. All of this comes to a boiling point when an FBI agent named Paula Dickens eventually gives Edamura a choice: either help them take down everyone involved, including Salazar, and get off scot-free, or take the fall with the rest of them once Dickens catches all of them, which is all the more possible now that the three of them are involved in the manufacture and exchange of real narcotics, not just candy. And all of it builds up to a finale which I'm not going to spoil, and just ask that you watch and find out for yourself if you haven't already. Keep in mind, again, this is only the first 5 episodes. There's still another 18... Oh, wait a minute. There's still another 9 episodes after this with just as much, if not even more character development outside of just Edamura himself. If there is some criticism I have for Great Pretender, it does have some issues with plot contrivance in some areas. The main characters pull off some pretty crazy things to try to accomplish what they're doing, and the show makes it clear that they're risk takers, but there's still a number of times that things could have gone wildly different against their favor had even the slightest thing gone wrong or just different in general. One of the big things that I noticed is that none of them use aliases. There's maybe only one time when one of them uses an alias, but virtually every other time, all of them use their real names. All while making enemies with a mob boss, the world's most prolific art critic, a literal prince, the Yakuza, another crime organization from Shanghai, and even the police to a lesser extent. Because, they're all criminals, technically, and none of them ever expect any of these people to track them down and find them rather easily when they have their names and their faces. This gets much worse in the final arc, especially near its conclusion, but having said all that, I still believe that there is far too much to make it worth passing up. Watch the first 5 episodes and decide for yourself if you think it's worth continuing. It's a mostly self-contained arc that introduces all the relevant characters and gets to know the main character, and you get the main point of it. Though personally, I'd hope that you'll continue to episodes 11 through 14, since that is, in my opinion, the best arc in the show. Ironic, since it's also the shortest. I got nothing else. Great Pretender is it's a great time. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Hope you liked the video, and I also hope that you didn't mind the lack of video too much. The process of trying to get this video uploaded has been a little bit more of a pain than I was hoping it would be. I've had to render this video a couple different times, and each time YouTube kept finding something new to copyright claim. Work has been kind of stressful the past couple weeks for reasons I won't go too in-depth into. And between that and this, I really don't have the energy to deal with YouTube's bullshittery, to put it lightly. I would like to put out more videos more frequently, and more periodically. I'd like to not be dead so often while I'm working on much longer videos, which is why I'd like to be able to make these kinds of videos that I can just put out really quickly, while still talking about things that I'm really passionate about. And this feels like it's going to make it a little bit more difficult, but I'll try in the future to, the next time I make something like this, to find ways to spruce up the visuals a little bit more, if that's a problem for you guys. If not, I mean, I can still make videos like this, if that's not a problem. If you guys are just fine listening to me talk, let me know in the comments. And speaking of which, also let me know if you think that I got anything wrong, if you think I got anything right, tell me that too. If there's anything else you want me to cover, tell me that also. And I guess there's not really much else to say. Have an excellent day, and stay platinum.